case, then you run into issues with respect to income assets of that trust, because at the you can reach the top tier, right, at 37%, all right, with just a minimal of like $14,000 of income of that trust. So that plays a part in determining what type of an irrevocable trust that should be. Increase complexity, okay, of these irrevocable trusts, right? I mentioned that you lose loss of control. You can't manage those assets anymore. Um, uh, it's irrevocable. Once you make this, you can't go back. And so those are considerations you have to look at when you're considering this type of trust for the grantor, in this case, John. And then also you have the decrease in flexibility, right? You have lack of access for John. John can't reach into that life insurance policy anymore and take advantage of the accelerated living benefits, or take advantage of the fact that he has a piece of property he wants to invest in, and the only money he can get at this point in time is in the life insurance policy, because that's a good way, because interest rates are a lot lower taking a loan from a life insurance policy. Well, if he gifted that or transferred that over to his irrevocable trust, he doesn't have access to that anymore. So you lose that flexibility. Also, remember, the grantor, in this case, the trust we're talking about, this irrevocable trust, the grantor, meaning John in this case, he can reserve the right to remove and replace the trustee, to the extent, though, that the individual who he replaces with is not subordinate to him, meaning he can't control that individual. Now, there are a lot of irrevocable trust in terms of types, right? And these are just a few. This is not an exhaustive list, right? But these are the more common ones that you may or may not have heard of, okay? So you have a credit shelter trust, a standby trust, the Q-tip. You have qualified domestic trusts. You have grantor retained annuity trust, unit trust, generation skipping, dynasty trust, asset protection trust, special needs trust, charitable trust, spousal lifetime access trusts, right? But we're only going to cover in this presentation, we're only going to cover 3 of those. And I'll tell you which ones those are going to be in a second. But if you advance the slide, Brian, what we also have, especially for you CPAs out there, that you can access this through your agents that you have relationships with. We have a great technical piece in terms of the overview of irrevocable trusts, what the advantages, disadvantages are, the types of irrevocable trusts they have. This is a great resource for you to determine, okay, which trust might be suitable for your client when doing that sort of planning. But today we're going to take a deeper dive into 3 types of irrevocable trusts. We're going to take a look at the irrevocable life insurance trust. We're going to take a look at the spousal lifetime access trust. And then finally, we're going to take a look at the survivor standby trusts. Now, when you're speaking with your clients, there's a lot of reasons why your clients may or may not want to do an irrevocable trust, right? One might be because of the complexity. It's too complicated, which means to them, that means it's very costly. They have to hire an attorney. They have to spend a lot of money in order to do this. My question to them would be, what's going to cost more? The fact that you don't have a plan, okay, and that $2 million in John's case is going to be included in the value of his estate and therefore owe $800,000, or spending $10,000 to $20,000 or $25,000 on an attorney who's going to draft a trust, okay, that's going to remove that asset from your estate. They don't have the time, a lot of excuses. But more importantly, a lot of times they say, I don't know what the future is going to hold for me. I don't know whether or not I'm going to need those assets at some point in time down the road if something happens to the economy, something happens to my family, something happens to my business, if the business is the majority of my income going forward. I don't want to lose control over those assets because I may need them, right? There's all different reasons why people may not do the appropriate planning today, right? But we're here to show you today with some of these trusts that you can start doing the planning today, and the grantor, John, in this situation, can maintain some control over those assets and give him some flexibility in terms of accessing some of those assets if he gifted them to an irrevocable trust. But we're only going to spend time on these 3 today. All right, so let's go to the first one, irrevocable life insurance trust. And as you can see in this schematic, right, we're going to have a trust that's been created. John is going to be the grantor of this trust. John is going to be looking for a way to remove that $2 million of death benefit, that life insurance policy he owns, from his estate. He needs to get that into that irrevocable trust. He's going to name Mary as the beneficiary of that trust while he's alive. The children are going to be the contingent beneficiaries. He's going to name someone else other than Mary as the trustee of the trust. Okay, and he's going to be paying premiums. Let's just say this existing policy has ongoing premiums to it. So once he gets it into that ILIT, he's going to have to make gifts to that ILIT every single year, okay, in order for Mary or the trustee to pay for those premium payments on that irrevocable life insurance trust. Now, there's a couple ways that John can get that policy into that ILIT, right? He can gift it. And if he gifts it, we have to look to the fair market value of that life insurance policy. And as Brian said, it's probably going to be somewhere around $400,000. So let's just say John has 2 children and he has Mary as beneficiaries, so he can make some gifts, right? Use his annual exclusion, but that $400,000 is above his annual exclusion. So he's going to have to use some of his exemption, his lifetime gift exemption, which he has $13.6 million today, if he doesn't want to pay an estate tax, right? And going forward, if that premium is above his annual exclusion amount, and that's times the number of beneficiaries he has of that ILIT, if it's above that amount, he's got to use, if he doesn't want to pay an estate gift tax, he has to use some of his his gift exemption every single year when he makes that gift. Now remember, in order for that to be a gift, that premium, all right, that gift of cash, in order to pay the premiums, it has to be a present interest gift. All that means is that the beneficiaries have to have access to that money and be able to use it. You can't put restrictions on it, right? So what we usually call in the estate planning world is crummy letters usually go out to the beneficiary saying that a grantor has made a gift to this trust in the amount of X, and that they have access to this money. And if they don't want to use it, what usually typically happens is between 30 or 60 days they have access to this, and then it expires, and then that cash is used to pay the life insurance premiums. Okay, at that point in time. So we go on. As long as that happens, if it's a gift, remember, if John dies within the first 3 years of that gift, that death benefit, $2 million, is going to be included in his estate. Another alternative would be for John to fund that trust using $400,000 if he has it on handy, right? And seeding that ILIT with that money, and then the ILIT purchasing the policy from him. In that case, we avoid the 3-year look-back period. In that case. All right, let's go and look at what would happen upon John's death. If John, let's say after 3 years, because I don't want to get into the situation of him dying within 3 years, but let's just say he gifted it, he survives 3 years, now it's removed from his estate, totally, the death benefit. What's going to happen is the life insurance company is going to pay that irrevocable life insurance trust the death claim. So $2 million is going to go in there. Remember, it's income tax free, right? Because even though it's owned by the ILIT, it still retains its character of income tax free death benefit. And now the trustees, the trustee will make distributions based upon the wishes, of John in his irrevocable life insurance trust. In this case, he names Mary as the primary beneficiary, so Mary will receive income or principal for her health, education, wellness, and support, or by other means, how we described in his irrevocable life insurance trust. And once Mary passes away, the children will receive the proceeds of that. Also, John could use that life insurance, those life insurance proceeds to, let's just say that it's been 20 years since John has gifted that policy to that trust, irrevocable life insurance trust, and all of his other assets that he owns have appreciated during that point in time. And we have the estate tax exemption has gone down from 13 million to somewhere around 7 million. Okay, and now he has an estate tax issue. Well, now that those proceeds can be used, if drafted appropriately, can be used to make loans to the estate or purchase assets from the estate that provide the estate liquidity in order to pay his estate taxes if that occurs. Okay, so let's just take a look at some considerations about John in terms of using this irrevocable life insurance trust. It provides John some liquidity, to the grantor's estate in the event that they have, maybe they don't have an estate tax issue, but they want to pay probate costs, okay, and settlement costs. We can do that, but if he does have estate tax issues, it can also be used for that. That the offers some creditor protection for both himself and for his beneficiaries. Gift taxes might be minimized using the annual gift exclusions, and no estate inclusion for either spouse if it's drafted correctly. Some disadvantages are that the gift tax consequences of transferring the life insurance policy to a trust, right? In this case, $400,000, remember, he might not want to use any of his lifetime gift exemption, right? The fact that there's going to be a 3-year look back period if it's not sold to the trust, right? Maybe he's in poor health. Maybe there's a chance he might not survive, right? So you might want to think about maybe selling the policy in that scenario as opposed to gifting it. Gift tax consequences on an ongoing basis, because if that life insurance policy is going to require premiums going forward, you have to determine how much those premiums are going to be, how many beneficiaries, how much of his annual exclusion can we use, right? If his premiums are above the annual exclusions he can use based upon the number of beneficiaries, then we have to take a look at that and make sure that he understands that he could be eating away at his lifetime gift exemption going forward. And lastly, the lack of control in the use of that asset while he's alive, right? That might be a big sticky point for John, in which he says, no, this is not going to work. I don't want to do the irrevocable life insurance trust, because what happens if something happens in the future and I need that money? So let's take a look at, okay, what might be another alternative for John in that scenario where he wants to have some control and a little bit more flexibility, right? Let's take a look at a spousal lifetime access trust, right? SLAT, fancy name, right? It is an irrevocable trust, and it is kind of like an irrevocable life insurance trust, except it has special provisions, okay, for the beneficiary, for Mary, during her lifetime, right? In this case, John's going to be the grantor, so he's going to create the spousal lifetime access trust, right? Mary, however, is going to be the trustee, and she's going to be the beneficiary while John is alive, along with the children, because Mary is both the trustee and the beneficiary. This type is referred to as a spousal lifetime access trust. So John transfers his policy to the SLAT. We still have the same issues, right? If we want this policy to be removed from John's estate, if he makes a gift, he's got to survive for 3 years. Or if he doesn't feel like he's got that possibility, he can sell it. So he's got to seed the trust with money in order to purchase it for its fair market value. He then is going to make annual gifts to the SLAT, right, for premiums, to make sure that policy doesn't lapse and the premiums are being paid. And these gifts might be tax free. If John uses his annual exclusion of today, as it stands, $18,000 for each of his 3 children, right? And as trustee, Mary will pay the premiums to the insurance company and send out the required crummy letters, okay, withdrawal notices once the gift has been made each year to pay for those premiums. And so during John's lifetime, Mary has indirect access to the policy's values. He has indirect access, John does, through the fact that Mary has direct access to the policy's values, okay, including, again, if it's drafted appropriately, the accelerated living benefits, okay, because under the terms of this spousal lifetime access trust, all right, the trust may distribute trust income or principal to Mary as the beneficiary while he's alive. Now, Mary may then share the funds with John, right? And this is one of the benefits of the SLAT. This is what gives John indirect access. Now, here's a big point here, all right? In order for this to be successful, all right, you really want to make sure that John and Mary have a healthy relationship, because in the event of some divorce, 2 years, 3 years, 20 years down the road, all right, that's going to put John in a position where he's not going to have any access to those distributions, because if they divorce on bad terms and Mary is still the beneficiary of that spousal lifetime access trust and they're divorced, well, Mary has access to it, John doesn't, And it's only if Mary, out of the goodness of her heart at that point in time, wants to help John, she may do so, but chances are probably that's not going to happen. Let's look at the spousal lifetime access trust when John passes away. So again, same thing happens as an irrevocable life insurance trust. Upon John's death, the life insurance company pays a death claim to the spousal lifetime access trust. Mary is the trustee. Mary is the beneficiary along with the children. And so again, in this particular trust, if it's done correctly and appropriately, that $2 million is going to avoid John's estate in terms of calculating the value for estate tax purposes. So once again, let's take a look at the benefits, okay, of this type of trust and the disadvantages. The benefits are that the spouse acts as the trustee, which gives indirect access to the assets of that trust, in this case the life insurance, including the cash surrender values and including the ABRs if drafted appropriately, the trust drafted appropriately. The disadvantages, the distributions to the trustee and spouse are limited to their health, education, maintenance, and support. And the grantor spouse loses access to the funds upon a divorce if the spouse dies, or if the spouse dies first. He's gonna have to rely on his children in order to be generous in terms of taking distributions, and then in turn giving money to him. So Brian, with that being said, you're going to talk about what if John wants even more control and more flexibility than a spousal lifetime access trust. But before we do that, I think we have another poll question.
Absolutely. Poll question number 2, Matt. And thank you. Those are great facts so far, right, on ILITs and slats and their use in the estate planning world. So with that in mind, the question that we have for our CPA friends, who again, remember, CPAs, if you want 1 credit for 1 hour of CPE credit, we need you to answer all 3 of the polls. This is poll 2 of 3. The question is, a life insurance policy owned by a irrevocable trust, an ILIT or a SLAT, for example, can help to minimize estate taxes for high net worth individuals who have estate tax exposure, right? So again, kind of going back to our example and trying to find ways to help our friend John from an estate planning perspective. We're going to leave this open for another 10 seconds to make sure, again, all CPAs on the line, in order to get your 1 hour of CPE credit, we need you to answer this poll question. Looks like we got, we almost batted 100 on this one. We are darn close. But with that being said, we are plenty of time, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and let you guys know that that is a true statement. Depending on the individual, if they have an estate tax exposure, something like a SLAT, an ILIT, what we're going to talk about, a survivorship standby trust, some sort of irrevocable trust in terms of housing a life insurance policy, can help to potentially minimize and make their estate more efficient when it comes to the estate tax exposure they may be facing. So, fantastic. So, as Matt mentioned, we just touched on ILITs, we just touched on SLATs, but one of the things that I think often comes up in those conversations is that idea of control, right? What if I want more control? What if John wants more flexibility, but he still wants to provide liquidity for those estate settlement costs and any potential estate taxes that are due? Well, there is a third solution, and maybe in this case, I guess, a more appropriate solution given what those goals and objectives that we just learned what they are. So the solution in this case is that we're going to incorporate the survivorship standby trust into the overall estate plan. And in this case, what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at a situation where we're going to have John be the owner of a second to die survivor life IUL policy on his and Mary's life. In this case, John would be the grantor, it's like, the creator of the trust that would become irrevocable at his death, and would name the survivorship standby trust as the contingent owner of our policy. In this situation, John, just like we saw before, well actually, let me rephrase that. In this situation, John is going to be directly paying those premiums on an annual basis because John is the policy owner, which means these aren't gifts. These are just literally, expenses to John, right? He's making a payment, aka a life insurance premium into the policy. Because of this setup where John is the current owner and our trust, our survivorship standby trust, is the contingent owner, while John is alive, John also is going to have full access to these policy values. Now, in this case, you might be saying, well, it's a second to die policy on John and Mary. Why is John the policy owner? Well, in this case, John is 1 year older than Mary, and as the male, in general, does not have the longevity that females may have. So if there is an individual in your planning in this type of a situation, excuse me, where one may not have longevity on their side, maybe less healthy for whatever reason, does not have that lifespan they don't believe will be the longer, that is the individual that you would want to own the policy. In a perfect world, for the survivorship standby trust to be efficient, because what happens upon John's death when he owns the policy on him and his spouse, the second to die policy, and our survivorship standby trust is the contingent owner? Well, when John passes, there is nothing paid out, right? Because it's a second to die policy. So there is no payment stream that comes out. And what ends up happening is that the survivorship standby trust now becomes the policy owner. And as John owned the policy when he died, as the fair market value is going to be included in his gross estate, but he can avoid estate tax by using a portion of his federal estate tax exemption. So in this case, right, our death benefit was significantly lower than the exemption, which means that upon Mary's later death, right, when Mary passes away, the proceeds will be paid to the trust and distributed according to the terms of the trust as we laid it out. Now, one thing that's important to pay some attention to when we do this type of planning is that if, in this case, Mary were to die first, remember, Mary is not the contingent owner. Our trust is the contingent owner, and John is the original owner. So if Mary were to pass, John would actually retain ownership of the policy, and the death benefit would be included in his estate. Now, this may be preferable depending on, again, thinking of what their net worth ultimately is and what the federal estate tax department looks at that time. Alternatively, if John wanted to, he may say, you know what, I still have these estate tax exposures. Now I may decide to truly transfer the policy to an ILIT, or that irrevocable trust that Matt was talking about a couple slides ago, right, to make sure that it gets outside of his taxable estate. However, if we do go the ILIT route, right, or if we do go, if we go the ILIT route, John will use a portion of his lifetime gifting exclusion, most likely to transfer that policy over. And as we talked about earlier, he's going to still have to live a minimum of 3 years to make sure it does get outside of that taxable estate. So that's why we said in the perfect world, John would be the individual that passes away first. But as you can see, right, when we have that conversation and we talk about those, let's call them contingency plans, even if John were to pass away first, it gives them a lot of options. And when we talk about estate planning, especially for high net worth individuals, the control and flexibility that an SST or the survivorship standby trust provides is significant during the lifetime of that grantor spouse. Additional considerations, just to have in mind, right? The potential for that death benefit, as we wanted to avoid estate taxation upon the death of either spouse if things go according to plans. And one thing that we didn't talk about, but can be very beneficial, is that when we do this estate planning, premiums for a second to die survivorship policy are generally going to be lower than they would be for two individuals. Or if you happen to have a couple where one of the individuals is uninsurable, our second to die policies will even allow an uninsured individual to be on a policy with an insurable spouse. So when you think about the addition that the non-grantor spouse can be the beneficiary of the standby trust without these estate tax consequences being incurred, it can be a very powerful statement and a very powerful planning strategy. Now, as I mentioned, there are some other factors that could turn that plan a little bit sideways, which is where that flexibility comes into play. But as we stated, it does work best if the grantor spouse, in this case that was John, had predeceases Mary, so that the policy flows directly into that survivorship standby trust that was created. Estate or gift tax consequences when the policy is transferred to the standby trust are something to take into mind, and that loss of control once the policy is truly in the trust after the grantor spouse is passing away. And there is the potential for estate tax inclusion of the death benefit if that grantor spouse, which again this would be Mary, were to predecease John, because in that case the policy is owned by John, at which point he has to make those decisions as to what other estate planning options may be appropriate at that point in time. So a lot of things were, different concepts, or not concepts, different type of trusts were just discussed. ILITs, SLATs, SSTs. What's important to know is that in all of these planning situations, the goal, for the most part, is to minimize estate taxes, right? Get these policies outside of the estate of, in this case, John, or our individual that we're planning for. It is important to recognize, depending on which type of trust you're looking for and what type of flexibility that you think you're going to need, different trusts may be more appropriate. So the survivorship standby trust is going to be the type that has the most flexibility and also providing the grantor the most access to the trust. So for folks that are in that in-between phase, right, maybe they're not sure what they need to do, something like a SLAT, an SST, or an ILIT may be appropriate. But each individual should consult with that outside estate planning attorney to make sure that we're doing what's most appropriate for that specific circumstance and those specific individuals. So we are nearing our end, but before we get to one more exciting piece that we want to show you guys, we have our third and final CPE polling question. That question is now on our survivorship standby trust. So the question is, let me rephrase this. It's stated, this is actually almost a Jeopardy answer that I'm going to rephrase as the question. Does a survivorship standby trust provide more flexibility when planning than an irrevocable life insurance trust? True or false? In the future, we may even get the Jeopardy music in here to give you guys a little flavor on these polling questions so you can have some anticipation. Again, any CPA on the line, we do need you to answer this as your third and final CPE polling question needed for your 1 hour of CPE credits. We're going to hang just like we always did for the full minute, just to make sure our CPA friends have adequate time to hit that true or false button, whichever they think is the appropriate answer. And we are at that minute, so we're going to go ahead and end the poll. And once again, we've been getting A's throughout these so far. We're back in that A range, and the majority of you once again said that it is true. A survivorship standby trust may provide more flexibility when planning than an irrevocable life insurance trust does. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a quick pivot to make sure everyone understands a key component to our estate planning as this sunsetting of the lifetime federal and estate tax exemption occurs, but also let you know that there are tools out there and strategies like we've been talking about that can help illustrate exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, so Brian did a good job early on of talking about our lifetime exemptions. We know that right now in 2024, every one of us has $13.61 million that we can give away while we're alive. If we don't give it away while we're alive, we have $13.61 million that we can use at death. Any assets above that are now then going to be subject to an estate tax. Married couple, you can plan it so you have double that. the husband and wife, there's portability, so you can work within those amounts. Next year is a great year to die because it's going to be higher than $13.61 million. So those are the 2 years that we know for certain is what's going to happen. The problem is, what if you have a life expectancy of more than a year and a half from now? Things are going to be uncertain. 2026, come January 1st, we know for a fact that unless Congress makes a change and takes some action, which is not likely, the exemption is going to go down to $5 million, which is what it was prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but there is an inflation factor on it, so we estimate it's going to be around $6.5 million. We won't know the exact amount until the inflation figures get calculated. So that right there is going to mean that people with larger estates are now going to be exposed to estate tax. And if you're going to live longer than that, we know that there's still going to be an inflation adjustment. But what is that going to be upon your date of death? No one really knows that at this point in time. But what we do know is that there's a coupon that's out there right now. Everyone has that $13.61 million. If you don't use it, come January 1st, you've lost the ability to use that coupon. And you're going to go back to whatever the rates are at the time, that $6.5 million. So you're going to lose a substantial amount that you have that you can use to gift. And with some of the proper planning, setting up trusts, you can still have some control of all of those monies with some of the techniques that were just explained earlier. So it's something that has a time sensitivity to it. We don't know when we're going to die, but we do know that our coupon's going to expire in a year and a half from now. So if you have clients with high net worth, something that you might want to bring to them sooner rather than later. Come December of 2025, when we have a month left, all the attorneys are going to be flooded. They're not going to be able to take new cases. So you want to start now while you still have time, if you would like to do some planning and try to save some potential estate taxes for your clients. But again, we don't know what it might look like beyond that. So luckily, we have a couple calculators. But let's look at a real quick case study, Mike and Maria. They're currently 56 years old. They have $15 million of net worth. And they want to know, well, should they use it or is it okay to lose it? It's hard to say because they have, at 56, they have a long life expectancy. They're going to be around for a while, they hope. So likely, National Life has introduced a brand new thing. It's called our estate tax calculator. We're going to have a 14-question survey that the clients can fill out. It talks about what are your assets now, how much do you make, what's your spending habits, are you interested in a one-time gift right now to use some of your lifetime exemption before it expires? Do you have a life insurance need? If so, what is that need? How much death benefit would you like to consider? What are the costs of that? So there's 14 questions that you can put together based on the client's actual figures. And then we're going to do some forecasting of that. You can forecast it up to 20 years for life expectancy. So if you have a younger client, you can go full 20 years. If the person's closer to life expectancy, it doesn't go quite that long. And we're assuming some growth rates. We're looking at from the actual exemption amount. You have the 13.61 this year. We're giving you 14 million next year, then dropping it down to about 6.2. And then from that point on, we're going to grow it at 2%. Since we don't know what's going to happen, we do know that there is an inflation factor on it. So this is the law the way it is today. Then we're going to look at their assets that they have right now, how much they're spending, how much they're growing. Then you have two assumptions that you can make for growth. You can do a flat 4%, a more conservative figure, or you can tie it to the S&P 500. So we're going to look at the last 20 years of the S&P 500 and give you those results in reverse order. You can pick a combination of those. You can have some tied to the S&P. S&P has averaged closer to 9% over the long run, but you have swings of positive or minus 20 to 30% in any given year. So it can be very volatile. And as we know, people age, they don't like that volatility. So we give them the option of the fixed rate, or you can have a portion of it that is more volatile than the S&P 500. And then we're going to look out 20 years from now, or whatever you want to look at from a life expectancy point, and let you know what your potential liability is. have it run under 4 situations. First one is that you do absolutely nothing. Take no action now, you're going to keep your assets, and they're going to grow to what they're going to grow to, and we're going to calculate your tax liability. In this case here, we had $15 million in net worth, we had whatever their spending habits were. 20 years from now, that's projected to be $47 million of assets upon their death. That means that they would have almost $12 million estate tax due, so the beneficiaries would receive $35 million, which is roughly 75%. So the government will be taking 25% of the total estate in terms of taxes. But there are some other options that we have to try to reduce that. One of them is simply having a life insurance policy that's going to be owned by an ILIT. So you're going to gift the premiums into the ILIT each year. Mike is going to own this policy personally, or the trust is going to own the policy, but Mike is going to be the donor paying the premiums on an annual basis. So you can see that its net worth upon death is now $45 million rather than 47. So it took some money out from his assets, and then it got invested in the trust, so it didn't grow with interest. So he has a little bit less that's subject to estate taxes, 11.4 rather than 11.9 is his estate tax liability. But you'll see the beneficiaries get an increase to $38 million. They had bought life insurance outside of the estate, so it's not subject to estate taxes, but the beneficiaries do get to keep that death benefit. So that combination of just having a life insurance policy owned in an ILIT means that you can keep 84% of your taxable estate. A third option we have is, well, let's use some of our coupon that we have before it expires. What if I decided to give $7 million into a trust? He has still enough assets to live off of. You figure they're going to keep $8 million. They can comfortably live off of that, but let's give $7 million away right now to a trust. So it's not part of our taxable estate. It's going to grow with the same factors that your personal expenses are growing. So 20 years from now, this personal estate is now only $20.9 million. That means that your taxes that are due are substantially less than if you had kept everything yourself at $47 million. So now the IRS is only going to take $4 million. That happened to be around the $4 million that's due, so your beneficiaries are going to receive $43 million of your net estate because they get the $7 million plus all the growth that happened. So that puts you to 91% in this particular example. But the best case is if you combine those two together. You're going to gift the $7 million into the trust, and that trust is going to use that $7 million to buy the life insurance policy. So the premiums are going to go in, purchase the life insurance of $4 million of death benefit in this example. It's still going to, all the excess money is still going to earn interest. So now that $4 million is still your tax liability because you still had $20 million and the personal side that's grown, but your death benefit of roughly $4 million is going to replace your taxes that are due. So all $45 million at the end is going to go to the beneficiary, so roughly 100%. So you had no loss in value to your estate by doing some proper planning and incorporating life insurance into the gifting strategy. So this is a great calculator that we have that will project into the future as to what your tax liability might be and what you might want to consider planning for. It's very dynamic. You can change the amount of death benefit, change the premiums, the amount of the gift that you want to put in, and it will all recalculate on the fly to let you know what you might want to plan for looking into the future to help your clients put themselves in the best position. Along with just the summary, we do have graphs that are in there that's going to show you the growth each and every year, so you can kind of track. It's not just now and 20 years from now. You can see the pattern and how it's going to grow. How volatile you want to make it, you'll see the up and down swings with the S&P 500. We do have, ends up being a 4-page PDF report, which gives you a lot more details, a summary of what your inputs were. So it's a great tool that you can have. You do have to be a licensed financial professional with National Life to get to this calculator. So unfortunately, as CPAs, you're not able to go directly into this and do it yourself. But if you have a partnership with one of the financial professionals, they'll be happy to run this for you provide these reports. It's a great PDF that you can hand out. We think this is a great tool to really help explain to your clients how this works and what your potential impact can be. But we have a lot more than just this calculator. We have a lot of other marketing materials as well. We have flyers out there, we have videos, we have one on the irrevocable trust. The survivorship standby trust is more technical resources, a lot of detail from the tax codes, things that you should need to know or want to research on. We have the use of life insurance and trusts. And then we have several videos, little 2 to 5 minute videos that can explain this one a little bit better. Again, survivorship standby trust, irrevocable life insurance trust, and one of the spousal lifetime access trusts. So all of this information is here to help you learn more, to better understand some of these concepts. And this was our Practical Tuesday webinar. We have several more coming up throughout the year. The next one's going to be July 23rd. We're going to continue our estate planning concept with specifically using how life insurance is used in estate planning. So we hope you find this valuable and are able to help some of your clients and continue growing and learning and getting your CPE credits, because everyone always likes those.
Absolutely, thank you, David. And to David's comment, we have, what is this, about 6-7 more months in the year, so that means the potential for 7 more CPE credits for folks that are CPAs and on the line and have been getting a lot out of these Tactical Tuesday webinars. So we want to thank you all for attending today's session. And what we will do is we will certainly make sure that we get a copy of these slides out to the attendees, as well as do our best to get our CPE credit and CPE certificates out to our CPA colleagues and CPA attendees in a timely manner. So once again, we very much appreciate everybody's time today, and we hope to see you next month, where, to David's comment, we will be able to do a great conversation on the uses of life insurance in estate planning to once again offer CPE credits. So we hope to see you the 4th Tuesday of every month. We hope to see you next month, July 23rd, for our next session. Hope everyone has a great day. Best of luck.